A beige hoodie and a designer handbag, two pieces that told vastly different stories. To the staff, the hoodie screamed unworthy, while the handbag went unnoticed beneath their judgment. All Vanessa Blake wanted was to use the restroom during a quick site visit. Instead, she was turned away, dismissed, and subtly humiliated. But what happened just 12 minutes later would shut that coffee shop down forever. This isn't just a story about restroom access. It's a wake-up call wrapped in quiet power and a lesson the world won't forget. It was 10:35 on a quiet Saturday morning when Vanessa Blake stepped into a coffee shop tucked inside the upscale Westmore Plaza. She wore a beige hoodie, faded jeans, and clean white sneakers, an outfit more functional than flashy. At 39, Vanessa carried herself with the effortless composure of someone who knew who she was, even if others didn't. The scent of roasted espresso beans filled the air, mingling with the soft hum of morning chatter. To any onlooker, she might have seemed like just another shopper pausing for a caffeine break. But Vanessa wasn't there for coffee. Not yet. She was touring the building that her firm, Blake Holdings, was finalizing a major investment in, and at that moment, all she needed was a restroom. Calm and polite, she approached the counter where a young employee greeted her with a neutral smile. "Excuse me," she said with quiet urgency. "Would it be all right if I used your restroom real quick?" The employee hesitated, then replied flatly, "Restrooms are for customers only, ma'am." Vanessa nodded, unfazed. "Of course. I'll order a latte right after. I just really need to go first." But before the employee could respond, a voice cut in, firm, dismissive. It was Greg, the store manager, who had been watching from behind the bar. A tall white man in his mid-40s, Greg glanced at Vanessa, eyes briefly scanning her hoodie and sneakers before making a snap judgment. "Rules are rules," he said bluntly. "We're not a public facility." There was no offer of compromise, no hint of empathy in his tone. The words hung in the air, casual but loaded. Vanessa didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice or plead her case. She simply gave a soft smile, nodded in silence, and walked out. Behind her, the manager turned back to his team, muttering something under his breath about people taking advantage. One of the younger baristas, a woman no older than 25, leaned in and whispered, "Do you know who that was?" Greg shrugged, unimpressed. Just someone who didn't want to follow the policy. But Vanessa wasn't just someone. She was the CEO of Blake Holdings, the very firm negotiating the purchase and redevelopment of the entire Westmore complex. In that moment, though, she chose not to assert her title or drop a name. She didn't need to, because sometimes dignity speaks loudest when it says nothing at all. And sometimes a locked restroom door reveals far more than any corporate memo ever could. It was 10:35 on a quiet Saturday morning when Vanessa Blake stepped into a coffee shop tucked inside the upscale Westmore Plaza. She wore a beige hoodie, faded jeans, and clean white sneakers, an outfit more functional than flashy. At 39, Vanessa carried herself with the effortless composure of someone who knew who she was, even if others didn't. The scent of roasted espresso beans filled the air, mingling with the soft hum of morning chatter. To any onlooker, she might have seemed like just another shopper pausing for a caffeine break. But Vanessa wasn't there for coffee, not yet. She was touring the building that her firm, Blake Holdings, was finalizing a major investment in. And at that moment, all she needed was a restroom. Calm and polite, she approached the counter where a young employee greeted her with a neutral smile. "Excuse me," she said with quiet urgency. "Would it be all right if I used your restroom real quick?" The employee hesitated, then replied flatly, "Restrooms are for customers only, ma'am." Vanessa nodded, unfazed. "Of course, I'll order a latte right after. I just really need to go first." But before the employee could respond, a voice cut in. Firm, dismissive. It was Greg, the store manager, who had been watching from behind the bar. A tall white man in his mid-40s, Greg glanced at Vanessa, eyes briefly scanning her hoodie and sneakers before making a snap judgment. "Rules are rules," he said bluntly. "We're not a public facility." There was no offer of compromise, no hint of empathy in his tone. The words hung in the air, casual but loaded. Vanessa didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice or plead her case. She simply gave a soft smile, nodded in silence, and walked out. Behind her, the manager turned back to his team, muttering something under his breath about people taking advantage. One of the younger baristas, a woman no older than 25, leaned in and whispered, "Do you know who that was?" Greg shrugged, unimpressed. Just someone who didn't want to follow the policy. But Vanessa wasn't just someone. She was the CEO of Blake Holdings, the very firm negotiating the purchase and redevelopment of the entire Westmore complex. In that moment, though, she chose not to assert her title or drop a name. She didn't need to, because sometimes dignity speaks loudest when it says nothing at all. And sometimes a locked restroom door reveals far more than any corporate memo ever could. Greg, the store manager, approached with a clipped stride and the kind of authority that didn't invite discussion. A white man in his mid-40s with a neatly pressed shirt and an air of quiet entitlement, he gave Vanessa a cursory glance, from her beige hoodie to her sneakers, and made up his mind before she could say another word. "We're not a public restroom," he said, his tone firm but dismissive. "We're not here for people just wandering in off the street." The judgment in his voice wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Vanessa, maintaining her composure, offered a polite smile. "I understand. I was going to order something right after—" But Greg cut her off, arms crossed. "Rules are rules. We can't make exceptions, or it defeats the purpose." The underlying message wasn't about policy, it was about who looked like they belonged. And to Greg, Vanessa didn't fit that mold. Her hoodie made her invisible. Her skin tone made her suspect. He didn't see a potential customer, he saw a problem to be turned away. Vanessa didn't argue. She didn't try to explain who she was or what authority she held. She simply nodded once, calmly turned on her heel, and walked out of the store with quiet grace. Inside, the mood shifted. A young barista named Alina, who had watched the exchange with growing discomfort, leaned toward Greg and spoke just above a whisper. "Do you even know who she is?" Greg didn't blink. "She's someone who doesn't follow the rules. That's all I need to know." His voice was confident, unbothered, as if he had just done his job and nothing more. But what Greg didn't know, what he hadn't even considered, was that Vanessa Blake wasn't just another woman asking for a restroom. She was the decision-maker behind Blake Holdings, the firm negotiating the lease agreements for the entire Westmore Plaza. She wasn't some passerby. She was, quite literally, the person who could decide whether or not this coffee shop remained open. But instead of announcing that fact, instead of demanding respect or pushing back against the insult, Vanessa let the silence do the talking. She walked away not because she had to, but because she had the power to choose when and where to speak. At that moment, Greg believed he had won a small battle for store policy. What he didn't realize was that he had just lost something far bigger. Because sometimes the cost of arrogance isn't immediate, but it's always inevitable. And sometimes the people you dismiss with a smirk are the same ones holding the keys to your future. Just 30 minutes after Vanessa quietly exited the shop, Greg's phone buzzed with a call that would unravel his morning confidence in seconds. It was from the Westmore Plaza Property Management Office, and the voice on the other end didn't bother with small talk. "We've received a request from the primary stakeholder to terminate your lease agreement, effective immediately," the caller stated, cool and direct. Greg blinked, confused. "What? That can't be right. We still have 2 years left on our lease. Who authorized that?" There was a pause, then came the name that froze the air in his lungs. Vanessa Blake. Greg felt his stomach drop. "Wait, Vanessa Blake? That's impossible. She was just here. That woman—" He stopped, remembering how he'd dismissed her like she was a nobody. How he refused her a simple courtesy because of how she looked. The woman he had cast aside for not following policy wasn't just a potential customer. She was the CEO of Blake Holdings, the parent company overseeing the real estate investment for the entire Westmore complex. The woman in the beige hoodie who had asked politely to use the restroom had more authority in that building than anyone Greg had ever spoken to. In one quiet moment of dismissal, he had insulted the single person who could decide his store's future. And she had. The weight of that realization hit him with a slow, sinking dread. Vanessa hadn't needed to raise her voice, flash a business card, or declare her position. She had simply walked away because she could afford to. Now, the decision she made in silence echoed back with thunderous force. As the call ended, Greg stood still, his phone still pressed to his ear long after the line had gone dead. Around him, the shop hummed with the normal clatter of coffee cups and espresso machines, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath his feet. Alina, the barista who had questioned his judgment earlier, noticed the color draining from his face. "Everything okay?" she asked tentatively. Greg didn't answer. How could he explain that he had just cost them their location by disrespecting the one person whose opinion actually mattered? He had enforced a policy, yes, but at the cost of professionalism, decency, and foresight. In corporate America, appearances still deceive, and Greg had been thoroughly deceived. His assumptions, born from bias, had now placed his business on the chopping block. And all it took was 12 minutes of silence, one phone call, and a woman who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. As the truth settled in, Greg wasn't just embarrassed, he was undone. Because power, in its most effective form, doesn't announce itself. It moves quietly, decisively, and when it does speak, it does so with action. The very next morning, a large closed sign appeared on the glass doors of the coffee shop, its bold letters impossible to ignore. Regular customers slowed their steps, brows furrowed in confusion as they peered inside the now empty space. Whispers began to ripple through the mall. Was it a lease issue? Financial trouble? A surprise inspection? Rumors flew as fast as lattes once did behind that counter. But it wasn't the closure that truly shocked the Westmore community. It was what replaced the cafe that captured everyone's attention. Days passed, and instead of signs for a new franchise or another boutique, workers arrived with paint cans, sleek furniture, and bookshelves. The old signage came down. In its place, elegant lettering spelled out Blake Empowerment Hub. People began to gather outside, curious about this new venture. Soon it became clear this wasn't just a business. It was a mission. The space had been entirely transformed into a community resource center, offering free business, leadership, and financial literacy workshops for young Black women from underserved communities. Computers lined the back wall. A mural of powerful female figures in American history covered the side. Inspirational quotes framed the entrance. It wasn't just a hub, it was a sanctuary for growth, learning, and transformation. And at the center of it all was Vanessa Blake. She had taken the very space where she was once made to feel small and turned it into a platform to uplift others. There were no press conferences, no gloating, and no mention of the cafe that once occupied the spot. Just purpose-driven work, carried out with intention and clarity. Former baristas from nearby shops stopped by, some recognizing her immediately, others connecting the dots only after hearing the full story. Community leaders applauded the effort, calling it a masterclass in grace, leadership, and redirection of power. Vanessa never once spoke publicly about what had happened in that shop. She didn't need to. The message was in the transformation itself. In a world so quick to shut doors, literal and metaphorical, she had opened one wider than anyone expected. She had taken a moment of quiet discrimination and flipped it into a movement of opportunity. The Blake Empowerment Hub quickly became more than just a space. It became a symbol, a living reminder that when the world says no, you can still create a powerful yes, not just for yourself, but for everyone behind you. What was once a place of exclusion now stood as a beacon of inclusion, innovation, and inspiration. Vanessa understood that revenge could have been loud, but impact would always speak louder, and she chose impact. At the grand opening of the Blake Empowerment Hub, a diverse crowd gathered beneath soft string lights and a modest podium positioned where a coffee counter once stood. Community members, local leaders, students, and business professionals filled the space with quiet anticipation. Vanessa Blake stepped forward, not in a power suit, but in that same beige hoodie and white sneakers that had once been dismissed as not respectable enough. The moment was symbolic, powerful, and deeply intentional. She paused, looking out at the crowd before speaking with a calm but resonant voice. "I was once turned away from this very spot," she began, "not because I caused trouble, not because I disrespected anyone, but because of how I looked, because someone decided I didn't belong. I know that feeling. I've lived that judgment. But I also know the power in choosing how we respond." Her words were not angry. They were measured, wise, and grounded in experience. "I could have retaliated. I could have fought fire with fire. But I didn't come here to prove a point. I came here to make a change. Instead of revenge, I chose to build what I once needed. A space, a chance, a door that opens instead of closes. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Vanessa's gaze swept the room again, then settled softly. Sometimes, she said, her voice slightly warmer, what seems like just a restroom is actually the door to a revolution. The audience broke into applause, some people wiping away tears, others exchanging looks of admiration. Behind her, the new logo of the Blake Empowerment Hub shimmered in the morning light, a symbol of transformation, of redefining spaces that once excluded, and of rewriting narratives through purpose rather than resentment. What Vanessa had done was more than symbolic. She had taken personal pain and shaped it into public progress. She hadn't just created a program, she had created a legacy. Young women who once felt unseen now had mentors. Aspiring entrepreneurs who lacked resources now had guidance. Every workshop, every mentorship session, every resume review conducted inside that space echoed a quiet defiance against a society too often quick to judge. Vanessa knew she could have made headlines through retaliation, but she chose a quieter, more lasting path, one that would ripple outward with every woman who walked through that glass door and walked back out stronger. That morning, she didn't just reopen a storefront, she reopened possibilities. In a country where black women are too often silenced, sidelined, or scrutinized for simply existing, Vanessa's stand was not just personal, it was cultural. Her act of grace was her rebellion. Her compassion was her power, and with every story that would unfold within the walls of the hub, her message would ring clear. Redemption isn't about returning harm, it's about rewriting the future. And sometimes the smallest denials become the loudest catalysts for change. Within days, Vanessa Blake's story exploded across TikTok, X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram, garnering millions of views and reactions. A grainy clip of the Blake Empowerment Hub's ribbon-cutting ceremony, where she stood tall in the same beige hoodie that once invited judgment, was reposted by celebrities, entrepreneurs, and activists alike. But what truly ignited the internet was a viral caption that captured the heart of the moment. "Don't underestimate a woman in a hoodie. She might own the building." That line struck a nerve across generations, sparking conversations about power, appearance, and the quiet defiance that so often rewrites the rules. Comment sections filled with people sharing their own stories, being denied service, doubted in meetings, or overlooked in classrooms, until the moment they proved otherwise. But Vanessa's story wasn't just about poetic justice or a corporate clapback. It was about how she responded, with grace, with vision, and with purpose. She didn't seek to humiliate those who had humiliated her. She didn't hold a press conference to shame anyone by name. She didn't lean on wealth or title to win validation. Instead, she let her actions speak. She transformed a place of exclusion into a launchpad for inclusion, and by doing so, sent a clear message. True power doesn't boast, it builds. In a world obsessed with instant reactions, Vanessa chose a patient, intentional revolution. And that choice rippled outward, inspiring not just admiration, but reflection. The lesson is clear. Judging someone by their appearance is one of the oldest and costliest mistakes we continue to make. The color of a hoodie, the tone of someone's skin, or the casualness of their outfit says nothing about their capabilities, their worth, or their ownership of the space they occupy. But those judgments still happen, every day in boardrooms, boutiques, coffee shops, and classrooms. Vanessa's story reminds us that behind every quiet presence may be a brilliant mind, a changemaker, a gate opener. And while status can often be silent, impact never is. Real power doesn't seek attention, it seeks transformation. It shows up not in noise, but in what's built in the aftermath of disrespect. More importantly, if you are one of the few fortunate enough to hold a position of influence, whether it's as a CEO, a team lead, a teacher, or simply someone with a platform, then your responsibility is greater than your pride. Use your position to open doors for others, not shut them in their face, because the truest measure of success isn't what you accumulate, it's what you enable in others. Vanessa didn't just reclaim her dignity, she reclaimed the space for generations to come. So the next time someone walks in wearing a hoodie, don't look away. Look closer. You might be standing in the presence of someone who's already changed the world and is just waiting for the right moment to do it again. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think differently about how power shows up in everyday life, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to X Daily Stories for more powerful narratives that matter, because sometimes the quietest people in the room are the ones who can change it.